Listen. A door. Heavy wood. Locked from the inside. On the other side of it, 3 palace servants stand perfectly still, listening for a sound that never comes. They knock. Nothing. They knock again. This time, louder. One of them presses his ear against the door, hoping to hear breathing, footsteps, anything at all. But there is only silence. You want to know what's behind that door? So do they. And in a moment, I'll take you inside. But before we can step into that room, we have to go back. Not 3 days. Further. Back to a fire, piece of bronze. And one man who had already made a decision. Long before he was ready to say it out loud. Before Moab. Before the crossroads. Before any of that. There is a blacksmith in Ehud's village. An old man. One of his eyes doesn't see very well anymore. And after 18 years under Moab, he has learned not to ask too many questions. Ehud comes to him at night, when the fire in the forge is the only light still burning. He doesn't ask for a farming tool. He doesn't ask for anything a man would carry where everyone could see it. I need a blade, Ehud says. About a cubit long. Sharp on both sides. Small enough to hide. The old blacksmith looks at him for a long moment that Ehud almost explains himself. But he doesn't. The old man doesn't ask any questions. He simply nods. After living under Moab for so many years, he knows that some questions are better left unanswered. So he turns back to the fire. Ehud watches the bronze change, first dull, then glowing bright, then almost alive inside the flames. The blacksmith hammers it flat, folds it, then hammers it again. Bright sparks fly into the night and quickly disappear. With every strike of the hammer, the weight inside Ehud's heart grows heavier, because a blade like this isn't made for cutting rope, or preparing food, or hunting. There is only one reason to make a blade like this. Ehud knows it. The blacksmith knows it. Neither of them says a word. At last, the blade is finished. The old man wraps it carefully in a piece of cloth and places it into Ehud's hands. He doesn't give him advice. He doesn't give him a warning. He simply looks at him with the kind of look that says, "Whatever you're about to do, I hope it is worth the price you'll have to pay." Ehud hides the blade inside his robe and walks home through the quiet village. That night, for the first time in many years, he doesn't sleep at all. You've probably done something like this too. Maybe it wasn't a blade made of bronze, but perhaps it was a letter you wrote and never sent, or a decision you made before you were ready to tell anyone, or a door you had already started walking toward, even while telling yourself you hadn't really decided. That's the loneliest part of every hard choice, the part where no one else knows, the part where you're carrying the weight all by yourself. Ehud didn't go home. Instead, he stood on the road and watched the caravan disappear over the hill. Then he turned around and walked back toward Moab. He was carrying the tribute that still had to be delivered, and hidden beneath his robe was the blade tied to his left thigh. Moab wasn't a place where strangers could stay for long without attracting attention. So Ehud did what he had always been good at. He stayed quiet, he kept to himself, and he made sure no one noticed him. He found a place near the market. Then he sat and watched people come and go. He spoke very little. That evening, a Moabite trader named Caliph invited him to sit beside his fire. He was just an ordinary man doing ordinary business. Travelers often passed through the city, so Ehud didn't seem unusual. After a while, Caliph smiled and said, "You're one of the tribute men, aren't you?" Ehud nodded. "So why are you still here?" Caliph asked. "Your people went home days ago." Ehud was quiet for a moment. How could he tell this man the truth? How could he say, "I've come back to kill your king"? So instead, he simply said, "I still have unfinished business." Caliph laughed, not because he was mocking him. He simply thought it was a normal answer. "With the king, I hope," he said with a grin. "He takes something from everyone who comes here." Ehud almost smiled. The man had no idea how true those words really were. And for just a moment, Ehud thought about telling him everything. The words almost came out. Then he stopped himself. Instead, he swallowed them, just as he had swallowed so many things throughout his life. That night, Ehud couldn't sleep. In fact, he barely slept for the next 2 nights either. So he sat alone in the darkness. Then the old voices came back. The voices he had carried for almost 30 years. He can't even use the hand God gave him. He heard Shamir's laughter again. It was easy for Shamir to laugh. But those words stayed with Ehud for years. Then he remembered every person who looked at his left hand and decided he wasn't good enough. However, the hardest voice wasn't theirs. It was his own. What if the door doesn't lock in time? What if your hand, the hand everyone laughed at, starts shaking at the one moment it must not? What if you die in that room, and no one in Israel even knows what happened? What if they forget your name, just as the caravan forgot you when you turned around? Ehud sat quietly. The blade rested across his knees. Then he picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. He pressed his thumb against the cold bronze and felt its weight. It wasn't just about a piece of metal anymore. It was a choice, and it had only one purpose. Then he remembered the look from the old blacksmith. Next, he thought about fathers across Israel. Men like Rifa, men he had never met. Fathers who stood quietly at their gates and watched strangers carry away the food their families had worked so hard to grow. Then he thought about the children who had learned to count grain, not because they forgot the number, but because they already knew how much they would lose. Fear was still there. It hadn't gone away, but after a long time, it became quiet enough for Ehud to hear something else. Not a loud voice, not a miracle, just a quiet decision deep inside his heart. He was tired of arguing with what he already knew he had to do, so he wrapped the blade again. Then he tied it carefully to his left thigh beneath his robe. His hands were almost steady now. Almost. Then he closed his eyes for just a moment, and he whispered, "Lord, if this is the path you have chosen, please help me finish it." He opened his eyes again. The fear was still not gone. But now, he wasn't carrying it alone. Some people think courage means feeling no fear, but that's not true. This wasn't a man running toward danger without thinking. This was a man who spent 3 nights wrestling with fear and got up anyway, not because the fear disappeared, but because something else became more important. And that's the kind of courage most of us will need someday. Morning came. Then Ehud walked toward the palace gates. He was carrying the last part of the tribute. Grain, silver, everything that still had to be given before the tribute bearers could return home. Palace guard stepped forward. Then he looked Ehud over from head to toe. This wasn't personal. It was simply his job. He looked at Ehud's hands, then at his waist, then at his robe. He searched Ehud's right side carefully, but he found nothing. So he stepped back and waved him through. However, he never searched the left side. The blade stayed hidden. Then Ehud walked into the palace. He presented the tribute. He bowed just as everyone else did. Then he turned and started to leave with the other men. But after taking only a few steps, he stopped. Then he turned around. This time he walked toward the throne, toward King Eglon himself. The king sat comfortably on his seat. He had ruled over Israel for 18 years. No one challenged him. No one frightened him. And the quiet man standing before him looked like the least dangerous person in the room. Then Ehud spoke. "I have a secret message for you, O king." Eglon looked at him with quiet curiosity. A secret message? From this man? Then he raised his hand. "Leave us." Immediately, the attendants bowed and walked out. One by one, they left the room. Then the heavy wooden doors closed behind them. And suddenly, Ehud was alone with the man who had ruled over his people for 18 long years. Eglon still believed he was the most powerful man in the room. However, without either of them realizing it, everything had already changed. The room was quiet, cool, private. It was the kind of place a king used when he wanted to hear something that no one else should hear. Then Eglon leaned forward. "What message do you have for me?" Ehud took one step closer. then another. Now he was close enough that no guard outside would think anything was wrong. Then he spoke. "I have a message from God for you." Those words made Eglon pause. Then, just as the Bible tells us, the king stood up. Maybe it was out of respect for God. Maybe it was because he was surprised. Or it was for another reason. The Bible doesn't tell us why he stood. Simply tells us, he stood. And in that very moment, Ehud's left hand moved. The hand no guard had searched. The hand no one expected. The hand people had once laughed at. The hand many believed could never be used for anything important. I won't describe every detail of what happened next. The Bible doesn't spend much time there either. What matters is this. The blade was made in secret. It was carried through 3 sleepless nights. And now it completed the purpose for which it had been made. Then Ehud stepped back. He locked the doors behind him. And he walked away, not running, not looking over his shoulder, just walking calmly through the palace. No one stopped him. No one suspected him. No one knew what had happened inside that room. Not yet. Outside the room, nothing happened. The palace servants waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Still, no one came out. At first, no one thought much about it. Then one of the younger servants looked at the older guard. "Should we check on the king?" he asked quietly. The older guard shook his head. "No, leave him alone. He wants his privacy." So they waited. Then another hour passed. The young servant looked at the door again. This time he couldn't hide his concern. "It's been too long." The older guard frowned. Then he looked at the closed door himself. "It's been exactly as long as it's been," he said. But this time, even he didn't sound sure. The Bible tells us something interesting here. The servants kept waiting until they became embarrassed. They didn't want to interrupt the king. After all, who wants to be the one who opens a king's private room at the wrong moment? So no one touched the door. No one knocked again. No one dared to go inside. And because they waited, Ehud had all the time he needed. By then, he was already far from the palace, past the city, past the hills, walking back toward Israel. The servants still didn't know why the room was so quiet. But one man did, and he was already gone. At last, the servants couldn't wait any longer. One of them finds a key. His hands are shaking almost as badly as Ehud's were, 3 nights ago, in a room none of them will ever know about. The key turns. The door groans open. Remember this door. It's the one you heard at the very beginning, the one they kept knocking on, the one that never answered. For a long moment, nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Whatever is inside that room on the other side of that darkness is about to change everything. But that's not for you to see yet. Not tonight. Somewhere past the palace walls, past the city gates, past the hills that swallow the road home, one man is climbing higher into the hill country. He isn't running. He isn't hiding. He's carrying something to his lips he has never carried before. A trumpet, and a message not even he fully understands yet. Because a door was opened tonight. But a door is not a nation. A dead silence in a palace room means nothing if no one is left brave enough to answer what comes after it. Next time, Ehud sounds the trumpet. And for the first time in 18 years, Israel has to decide if it still remembers how to stand. Curious about what's behind that door? Subscribe. You'll want to see what happens next.